Hi everyone. In today's presentation, I'm going to share with you a process that we use internally on managing all of our remote development teams. And this process helps to achieve consistent results in any product development process. And this is not some kind of theory. So this process has been used to manage projects for more than 150 businesses over the past 3 years alone. And collectively, we manage over 600 developers with this process. Considering that all of these businesses are not just based in the United States, but across the globe, and they're all size and shapes, I think it also could be useful for your organization. So this presentation will be most helpful for product and project managers and startup executives and founders. But even if you are, let's say, UX designer or senior developer and a part of the new product development team, then still this presentation could be very, very helpful, and you can learn a lot from it and maybe even share with your product owners so they could utilize this process. So before we get into the process itself, let's discuss why the process is so important. I'm not going to cover exactly how you would hire a remote development team, but we'll go through the pros and cons and the solutions, how to fill in the gaps. So the pros of hiring a remote development team or building your remote team is, first of all, you have an access to a much wider pool of talent, right? And then naturally, because of that, you have a competitive advantage over the compensation versus the local market, especially if we're talking about specialized fields where the local market could be quite shallow for the candidates. And then it's really much easier to hire versus in-house. First of all, because of those two things, the wider pool of talent and competitive compensation. So you simply have more people that fit your criteria. And second, you don't need to organize those in-person meetings. Nobody needs to travel to your office, search for parking, and all this kind of stuff. It's all done remotely through Zoom calls, right? So on the other side, when you have a remote development team member or multiple people, you have less control over them versus in-house team members, because in-house, everybody visits the office. If someone didn't show up at the office, then you already know the problem is there, right? With remote team, there is no such level of control. Then obviously it's a risk of intellectual property loss, because maybe one of your team members simply disappeared and does not respond to your messages, and anything could happen, and none of us live forever as well, right? So you also need to mitigate this issue. And the recipe to nail it all down and make sure you reap your benefits from the pros and I would say dial down the risks of meeting the downsides of working with a remote team is just to get your product development process or team management process right. So I'm going to be sharing this process from the perspective of managing a remote software development team, but take into account that this process can literally be applied to your marketing department, to your design department, etc. So first, let's discuss the common issues in remote team management. The in-office rules do not apply. Let's say in the office, you have some kind of process, right? And you have official meetings, etc. But then we also bump into each other during the lunchtime, or maybe we have a coffee near the coffee machine, etc. We just have a little break and we chit chat. And all of these additional points of communication then fill in the gaps of your process issues. Maybe one of your team members didn't get the point of a particular task, and another team member would help him or her out with this. So all of that acts as a glue in our social environment. In remote team environment, there is no such thing. Every single communication is structured and is based on request. So you either send the request and you wait for your response, for the response, or you receive a request, and then it's up to you to respond to this request either with text message or a call. The another issue is the inconsistency with the process, right? So maybe you had an in-house team, now you manage a remote team, or you need to apply certain rules and have part of your team working in-house and in office, and part of the team working remotely. So, and you came up with additional rules for the process, which is not exactly that transparent, and you see that people simply don't really follow it. And on the other end of the spectrum, you might have an issue where the process is so heavy that your team simply refuses to follow it. So there should be some kind of middle ground. Another potential issue is a technical debt of any kind. So not close tasks in team management tracker, oh, sorry, in task management tracker, not finished documentation on the product, particular part of the product, no daily reports, etc. So all of this accumulates quite quickly, and it drags the process, and it kind of like sucks the energy out of you, because you just don't feel well when there's a mess with the product development process. And the last part, but not the least, is the social fears over communication. So when things go wrong in office, in the office environment, uh, technically everybody knows everything quite quickly, right? Versus remotely, let's say your server is down, or like something is not going right with a particular task. Um, some team members could be afraid to communicate this to you as a product owner, because they fear this communication, that maybe you'll be angry at them, etc., etc. So, and within the in office environment, that not specifically working out the same way, because we are again kind of like forced to communicate. We're already in the office in the same environment. So those are the common issues. Now, let's focus a little bit on the product owner. So when we've been coming up with this process back in 2016, we've been thinking of how to measure the process greatness, so to speak. And obviously, there are other aspects, but specifically, we focused on one aspect that would be easy for us to track, is how the product owner feels about the product development process. And basically, we identified 6 levels. Number one is that, or I would say ground zero, is when you don't even think of it. So whenever somebody would ask you, like, so how's your remote team doing? And you'll be like, just everything's fine. I don't know. I didn't even think of this. Again, it's not like this type of response when you say it and then you literally have no idea what's going on. Simultaneously, you also have a full sense of control and transparency of what's going on with your remote team and what kind of project they're working on and where's their progress, right? So then from there, it could only go down, right? When you start feeling not okay about the process itself, about maybe the team performance, you don't really know, you don't really consciously think of this issue, but for some reason, something doesn't feel right. Then you start the second level, you start thinking consciously about the process issues, and you start kind of debating this problem inside your own head, so to speak. After this third level, you might discuss it with your wife or your loved ones, right? Like that something is not right, etc., etc. You're trying to resolve it. The next level after this, you express your open desire to fix things with your colleagues. Maybe you just say it in Slack chat or on Zoom call, etc. And if nothing done here, then the last level 5, you openly argue with your colleagues that uh, things are going out of hand, and something need to be done. So the goal of the process I'm sharing with you today is to make sure that from any of this level, we bring you to the ground zero, where you don't even think of it. Everything runs just fine. So it's hard to read the mind if you're not a product owner, right? But for the product owners, you guys know what I'm talking about. So now let's discuss the process itself. Surprisingly, it's quite simple, right? So the process consists of tools, specific rules, how to use those tools, and daily reports and regular calls. So let's get to it. So first of all, the tools. Uh, you might use some other tools, but those are just the tools that we have most experience with and used on the majority of the projects. So you should have some kind of task management tool. In majority of cases, we use Pivotal Tracker or Jira. There are other simpler tools like Trello. So I would not suggest using this because it is too simplified for the product development if we're talking about the software development. So take those tools and maybe you can try Asana or something else. Then the daily calls, that's usually Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype, whatever. But Zoom is good because it has the recordings. Option, and it's a little bit more organized, so to speak. It has the log of the recordings, etc. Then text communication for daily chat, that's Slack or Microsoft Teams. Again, Skype or other text messaging applications like WhatsApp or something like this would not work because they're not business oriented and there's no history of messages. The search is not that advanced. File sharing is a bit different. So you need to get used to using business oriented text communication tools and you'll appreciate it so much. Once you get used to it, then you would need to have some kind of dashboard for daily updates, and I'll explain how to use it. And the last part is the Git repository for code storage and other specialized software development tools or other tools you use if in case you're trying to apply this method for managing the, let's say, remote team of designers. So now let's talk about the rules for tools. So first, task management. Task management tool can be overused. So it could be a brilliant tool like Pivotal Tracker or Jira, but those tools have so many capabilities that you can drown in all of these features and it would be inefficient. So what we found most efficient is that when we take onto a project that we start a new product for one of our clients, we split the product into several phases. The phase could last from 1 to 3 months. And then we split this phase into weekly sprints. And again, here it's not the exercise to plan each weekly sprint ideally, because it's guaranteed you'll fail to meet your particular plan. Software development process is quite complex one, and things will change, or the product owner, you or your client, will ask for certain changes, etc., etc. The goal here is just to focus on first weekly sprint, and then you set up the tasks of this first weekly sprint or the current weekly sprint in a task management tool, task tracker, and focus only on this. So the way you set up the tasks for this first weekly sprint is that you actually describe the task and you estimate it in hours. Now, some people may say, well, we're not used to work and estimate by the hours, it's artificial. Well, technically, every single person in the world works by hourly schedule because the work week is 40 hours per week, 8 hours per day. That means that every single person in the world works on average on a full-time basis, 8 hours per day, 40 hours per week. So applying the hourly estimate to the tasks is actually much simpler than you might think. Yes, if you never used to this approach and your in-house team just transitioned to remote team and they've never done it before, then it might take them several weekly sprints, maybe 2 or 4 weekly sprints, where they'll be estimating their tasks and they'll be failing. They'll be assigning either too much hours per task or too few hours per task. But again, in 2 to 4 weekly sprints, everyone will get used to it and you'll see how efficient it is, because it helps everyone to be on the same page of what's going on with this particular list of tasks for the weekly sprint. And then each of the team members will know how they fill up their week of work. And it's just 40 hours. It's not that much really. And from the product owner perspective, it's not much for you to check because, again, it's just 1 week of work. The rest of the tasks from the project phase can be allocated in a backlog or icebox, whatever you call it. So then let's get to the goals. So we only suggest to host one call per weekly sprint at the beginning of the week. Some might say, well, this is unheard of. We need weekly stand-up calls. We measured everything, and I can tell you a story. We actually had one of the situations when the product owner requested that we should have daily stand-up calls to discuss the task for the day, etc. And what we found that basically by mid of the day, the product owner didn't already remember what has been discussed on that morning call, because as a product owner you have other responsibilities, other things, and you simply could forget what you've been discussing during the short 10-15 minutes call. So instead, having a 30 to 60-minute call at the beginning of the week where you approve, as a product owner, approve the list of tasks for the entire team for just 1 week and go through them on a shared screen through a task management tool, it makes it very efficient and kind of solidifies this 1 week of work, brings everyone on the same page, and keeps everyone on their toes because, like, you as a product owner understand that your team is going to work only on the tasks that you approve, and your team members understand that they're going to work only on the tasks that you approved. So, and then you have this call and you proceed with the weekly sprint, and the only next call is happens when you start the next sprint. So the next Monday, or maybe on Friday, if you're finishing up the sprint and there have been like lots of tasks and you want to start it then, you can do that. Or the opposite, maybe you start a sprint on Tuesday. By the way, I would not suggest starting this sprint on Monday, because then it means you finish it on Friday. And if you finish it with some kind of bugs, etc., then especially in the release, that might not be a good idea. So then we move on to and I forgot to tell that obviously if the situation is urgent and let's say a server went down, something happened, then obviously we do host those additional calls throughout the week if something urgent is happening. But as a rule of thumb, we have just 1 week, one weekly call. Then text communication. So text communication is very important, again, to utilize it in the proper way. The absence of daily text communication creates lots of gaps and misunderstanding and I would say wrong expectations, especially from the product ownership perspective. Versus excessive amount of communication creates non-productive environment. You can read up all those studies, but technically, again, it's psychological studies. You can just Google it. It takes about 20 minutes for a person, when disrupted, to get back into the state of flow or into the focus state and continue working on the tasks. Imagine if you would be messaging to this person every 10 to 20 minutes asking how is this and how is that, or suggesting something. That means that this person is going to be working on a at a half productivity level all day through. So it's not efficient. Through our process, we found that the most efficient way to communicate is to allocate a very specific number of hours throughout the day for the team to communicate. And it's usually 4 hours. So let's say from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., you discuss all the tasks in Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever. And the rest of the day, you just only communicate if it's urgent. And I would say that in most successful projects, this time frame is even shorter, just 2 hours. And basically what it does is that it allows developers to expect the communication in very specific time slot throughout the day, and then they know that they have this much time to actually do the work. So try this. If you haven't tried this, you'll be surprised with the results. And then obviously daily updates. This is a very important factor. So the task management is great as a bigger picture. Calls, again, is just once a week. Text communication, it's all chaotic, so to speak. So there's lots of like history of text communication going up. Nobody wants to scroll down, etc., or scroll up to see what anybody says 2 days ago. So what we see working most efficiently is to have short daily updates. They shouldn't be long, they shouldn't be short. The most ideal daily updates are just 2 lines long. So it's 1 or 2 sentences, what has been done during the day. And for the developers, it's very easy to write them because it takes no time after completing the day of work. And for the product owners, you actually go on to read them. So product owners would read these short reports because they're very easy to digest. And they come very handy when your upper management is asking what's going on with the project, and you can skim through daily reports and you can kind of refresh your memory what's going on throughout the entire week, what has been done, especially when you're working on a deadline pressing project, or maybe you've been traveling for business and you simply didn't have time to communicate enough with the team. So having those daily reports can help you to get up to speed very quickly. So now let's step back a little bit and discuss the situation when you're just starting a new product development endeavor, new venture, right? So what we would suggest you as a product owner to have in place for your remote team before starting, first of all, is the user stories, then the list of screens and features for your MVP and design preferences. Once you have this in place, you can proceed uh, with the process, right? And first, you would start with the design phase. And technically, it's like we suggest going backwards from the user experience, right? And the goal of the team is to build up the final user interface, the user stories, put together a design clickable prototype. Um, then, once you have your end user experience in place, it becomes more or less easy to choose the right technology stack and come up with the architecture for the backend and server. And only after that, you estimate the timeline and the cost of the coding phase. And even if you're working within the in-house team, I would still highly suggest to go through all of these phases because internal team budgeting is as important as if you would be working with other company, right? So after the design phase is completed, you do the interim testing and feedback sessions with your design clickable prototypes with your potential users. And after that, after you implement all of these changes, only then you start the coding phase and utilize the process that I just mentioned. And obviously after that, you go for the final testing and launch of your MVP. So yeah, one other important part I would like to say throughout the coding phase, uh, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, you would need to mitigate the intellectual property theft or intellectual property loss. So for that, I would again suggest you to discuss it with your team members that they have to commit code on a daily or weekly basis. Then, since you have a remote development team, make sure that you going to conduct a third-party independent code review. And it shouldn't be the situation when you something is going south and something is really not going right, and only then you decide to conduct a third-party code review. No, in opposite, it should be a completely normal practice for you because this is your insurance to see that everything is in place. And obviously, if you are a technical product owner yourself, a tech savvy, then you might skip this step. You can check everything yourself. But if you are non-technical product owner, then this step is a must. And again, you don't need to fire your team after this. Your goal is just to conduct the third-party code review to make sure that everything is in good shape. If there are some small things to tweak and adjust, great. Ask your team to fix it and continue. Then obviously have backups because again, you never know what might happen. Maybe one of your developers' machine would die out, or something would happen with the server, etc. Databases. And again, if you're not a technical product owner, get a tech savvy advisor. If you're a startup founder or startup executive, advisors could be the best form of have this kind of support. If you work in a large organization, then simply communicate with the upper management that you need this type of person who could support you on maybe just a couple of hours per month to make sure that from a technological perspective, everything is in place. And then the last part of this presentation, let's talk about the social aspects and just some social rules. It is, in fact, very, very important. So first of all, be kind. Uh, with remote team, it is tenfold more important versus just in normal life, because again, in normal life, let's say you see a person coming into the office and at the morning, and by look at this person face, you understand that you better not talk to this person before he or she gets a cup of coffee, right? And there are all sorts of other nonverbal signals we give to one another or can read from one another that allow us to smooth out the conversation and communication in the office environment. With remote team, there is no such situation. So by default, you can discuss it with your team members that let's communicate in a positive style and just be kind to one another, because we cannot see how the other person feels in this particular moment behind the screen. Then the second rule is communicating no matter what the news. So I'll give you the example. We had a situation, hired a new designer, one more designer, and um, I had a research and development project in place, so I gave a specific task to this designer to work on this. And we already had this designer working on other projects for several months and doing phenomenal job. But for some reason on this particular task, this designer simply disappeared. And I would message to this designer, no response. And then I was talking to one of our other team members and I asked like, hey, what's going on? Uh, like with this particular designer. And he told me like, well, don't know. It's like everything seems to be fine. I just spoke to him this morning. And I was like, how's that happening? I'm the CEO of the company and this person didn't respond to me. This designer didn't respond to me on this task I assigned to him. And turned out that this designer was so terrified of him not being able to complete my task on time that he got into this loop that he would only message me. He decided that he would only message me when he would complete this task. And then the time would drag one day after another. And eventually he just stuck. And I told my colleague that, just tell him that everything's fine. We just need to talk, and I'm not going to be, angry or something like this. So we had a conversation, and I literally just told the designer right up front, like, hey, if even if you would just tell me, like, I don't like this task, I don't want to work on it, that still would be fine, because we already know that you're a great specialist. You already work on those projects. Everything is on time. Everything is great. It's not necessary that you have to complete this new project ideally. And that was such a relief for this designer. And so basically, I explained the exact same thing, that no matter what the news are, you should communicate. Don't wait till you fix the things. Just agree that you can send a short message. Hey, I'm here. I'm alive. Like, etc., etc. So I don't know, the server went down, and instead of waiting till it's going to back up, just say it like, I'm here working on the problem, something like this. Then the other aspect is, again, communicating only in the positive style. And why is it this way? Again, because you do not know what is the stage or the reason behind this person behavior. Maybe some emergency happened in the family and this person was late for a meeting, or maybe this person was delayed with the tasks, etc. You don't know. So it's best to be open and positive about pretty much anything what's happening within the team. Then your team members will appreciate it, and they will respect you more as a product owner, because we all individuals, we're all human beings, and we all expect a good treatment, so to speak. And then obviously the last one, don't fire people if they fail. We're all human beings, and it's guaranteed that every single team member, including yourself as a product owner, will fail. So instead of firing them for this, make sure that you apply all the other rules, and make sure that you fix the process, and fire the person only if you see a consistency of this person not meeting the deadlines or doing all sorts of mistakes. But don't fire people if they fail just once or twice. It's going to be happening occasionally, so it's totally fine. So thanks so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexey. That was really great and very informative, especially from my point of view as well. So thank you. We do have a few questions from the audience. The first one is actually it's a two-part question: is how scalable is this process? And then the second part is, what if we have 20 plus devs in the team?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me. Well, technically, we actually have scaled this process on one particular project up to 20 developers. So that's right on the spot. And this particular team was working on the project for an entire year. So I would say this process is very much scalable. So naturally, this begs another question, that how many people, how many developers can one product owner or project manager manage efficiently? So usually by just psychological data, it's somewhere 6 to 7 people can be managed efficiently by one person. That's the structure of the management is usually suggested. So 20 people just for one product owner or team manager is quite a stretch. But even till these numbers, this process is quite efficient. So
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And the second question is, what if my team members would decline to follow this process?
that's a fun one, right?
Yeah, that's a great
That's,
question.
yeah, that's what I mentioned, like within the presentation, that sometimes like team members simply would be, too lazy to follow the process, that is too much of a complexity, or maybe it's like so undefined that it's
Mhm,
unclear what to follow. Well, this is exactly, again, back to my slides. It's kind of like you have to have some kind of like a middle ground
mhm,
within the process and rules and requirements. That's why we suggest having just one weekly call instead of having daily stand-ups, or that's
mhm,
why we suggest bite-sized updates, which is like one line or two lines of text per person. This
mhm,
way, again, imagine a developer working like really focused for 8 straight hours, so 6 to 8 straight hours a day, and then at the end they would need to, him or she would need to write a report. So obviously it would be grilling to ask to complete like a really good report. So just 1 or 2 lines is good. And same goes alongside for the other rules. I think it's really important to draw a line, like whom do you have on the bus as team members. And
mhm,
maybe if you're switching from in-office environment to remote, and your people simply saying like, well, I'm not used to using pivotal tracker, or I'm not used to having this weekly call reports, because I just don't like them. Well, I would say it's like in all the joke about vegetables and a kid, like when a kid asks
mhm.
mom like, I don't like the vegetables, and she replies, you don't have to like them, you have to eat them. So here's the same, like we're applying the process not for the sake of us liking this process as a like being a cornerstone of our work. Like we should love what we building, right? And we should love like what we produce on a daily
Mhm,
basis. That is the gist, right, of everything. But the surrounding, like the framework, this process in particular, it's just something that you establish, and then you get used to following through this process that supports you from all of these different levels and helps to bring you to the ground zero as a product owner. And
mhm,
then it actually becomes habitual. And it has been, again, driven all by the data and been through more than 150 projects. So that's like a lot of data, I should say. And
mhm.
we definitely measured everything that we could, and it definitely works in this particular way we described it. So if your team members say we don't want to follow it, then maybe, have a talk to them and give it a shot. If they request give it a shot, then they probably need to find some other place.
Okay, fantastic. And that is the end of the questions. So thank you very much, Alexey. Apparently this is, unless there's something else. Oh, okay, there's another question. Must have just popped up. Sorry about that. How do you resolve the issues? For example, when one of your developers won't reply for days?
Yeah, that's a good one, especially if you have fully remote team when, like you're in one location and the team, let's say, is in the other location, that's quite easy. But when all of your developers are simply working from home and all of a sudden your team lead is not responding or some other team member, then it becomes like a challenge. So that's actually exactly what I've mentioned, that you should be prepared having backups and just making sure that all your intellectual property is protected if you have some
Mm,
freelancers on your team as well. So you should be ready for failure. That's the
mhm.
recipe. So like accept it, that okay, something could happen and one developer could simply disappear, and what would you do in this case? And then just follow through my recommendations, and everything. Obviously, if it will happen and the worst case scenario, you lose your developer with the code he or she wrote, at least you have all of the backups and all the property till that particular moment, and it's still going to be an issue to resolve, but at least you prepared yourself.
Okay, awesome. Thank you again. I'm looking just to make sure there's no more questions. All right, I think that's it. Again, thank you very much, Alexey. I enjoyed the session, and thank you for those that showed up and provided the questions. Appreciate it. Have a great day, and that's it for this session.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, guys. Have a
Thank you,
good one.
Alexey. Ciao.
Bye.